Hey guys, welcome to another episode of The Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick. Today I'm talking about 5 of my favorite bands that are keeping rock alive. There's a bunch of links down below. Make sure you check them out. There's links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlist I put together every week, and the Patreon page. Make sure you check all that out. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time I release new episodes. So over the last several years, I'm sure most of us have heard that rock music's dead or rock music's dying, but there's still some really great music that's coming out every single year. Yes, it's not in the mainstream like it once was, but that doesn't. I think it doesn't take away from some of the stuff that some of these bands are doing. Some really great stuff. They had these albums been released, 20, 25 years ago. I think they would have been gigantic releases. But we're still seeing some really cool stuff come out every single year. I'm only going to talk about 5 of my favorite bands, but there's so many other great ones out there. I'm sure you can just drop me a comment down below and let me know what some of your favorite newer rock bands are. I'm talking about bands that have been making music for, let's say, 15 years or less. There's definitely older bands that are still doing great stuff even in 2024. But I'm talking about just newer bands that have kind of come on the scene over the last several years. The first band on my list, I think, is the newest band. They formed in 2017 or 2018. Debut album came out in 2021. They had a new album come out last year called Can't Find the Breaks. I absolutely love both of their albums so far. The band is called Dirty Honey, and I think the best way to describe this band is if you take mid to late 70s Aerosmith, mix in some blues rock in there, so toss in some Led Zeppelin, throw in some Black Crowes, you'll get kind of the sound that Dirty Honey is going down. They're a band out of LA. Like I said, absolutely love both their albums so far. I can't wait to see what this band does in the future. There's not a bad track off of either one of their albums. I do need to grab their latest album. I don't have that one on vinyl yet, but I was turned on to this band from someone from the Vinyl Den Facebook group. We were talking about new music a couple of years back, and they were like, "Oh, if you love these 3 or 4 different bands, I really think you'll enjoy Dirty Honey," and I absolutely do. This is probably one of my most played albums over the last couple of years. The next band musically is very similar to Dirty Honey. Some great blues rock stuff, very much rooted in the 70s. If you're a fan of Aerosmith, if you're a fan of Led Zeppelin, even like early 90s Black Crowes, I really think you'll like the band Rival Sons if you haven't checked them out yet. Started back in 2009. They released 8 studio albums over those years. So last year they released 2 albums. They released Lightbringer and they also released Dark Fighter. Both of them ended up being in my top 25 albums last year. These guys have done nothing bad so far. I've enjoyed all their albums. Very few skippable tracks across their 8 studio albums, which is really hard to say for a lot of newer rock bands. But this is another one of those bands, man, where I'm saying, when people talk about rock music being dead, this is one of those bands I kind of point them to. Like I said, especially if you're a big fan of 70s rock music, I think a lot of people will love this band. Of course, I can't talk about newer rock bands rooted in the 70s without talking about this next band. Of course, that is Greta Fleet. So these guys, their debut EP came out in 2017. Their debut album, which is called The Anthem of the Peaceful Army, came out in 2018. I was blown away by that album. I didn't know how the band was going to progress and do anything different because they still had that very much. I know people kind of knock on them for having a very strong Led Zeppelin vibe, and the band does. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Just as long as you're creating good music, it doesn't come off as like a cheap knockoff of an older band. Because to be completely honest, bands for decades have been kind of ripping off of bands that came before them. So I don't really see that as a bad thing. But I didn't know how they were going to progress from that debut album. And then in 2021, they released Battle at Garden's Gate, which has been one of my favorite rock albums of the last couple of years. I know they released Starcatcher last year, which I was really down on. A lot of people were really down on that album. I think musically it was still a really good album. I think what really hurt Starcatcher was the production work on that album, which is one of the worst produced albums of the last several years. But this is one of those bands that, like I keep saying with the other 2 bands, they're moving rock music forward. You're doing something that's very much rooted in the past, in 70s and early 80s rock, but still kind of putting a newer flair on it. And, I still like to see what these bands can do moving forward, evolve their sound, do something a little bit different and see where their version of rock music can go. The next band is a little bit different than the first 3 I talked about. They're not really rooted in the 70s like Greta Fleet, Rival Sons are, Dirty Honey are. This band definitely has a harder edge to it. I'd say kind of harkens back to some hard rock, some grunge of the 90s. Like I said, different kind of flair, different kind of style of music, but still doing some really great albums. That band is the Pretty Reckless. So these guys, I think their first album came out back in 2010. They've released 4 albums so far. This is their latest album, Death by Rock and Roll. Like I said, very much like 90s alternative rock style, doing some really cool stuff though. They've kind of evolved from their first album, where it was still like that grungy alternative kind of stuff. But as they've kind of progressed through their career, they've mixed in some country elements. So there's some Americana elements in there, some folk elements. I love to see where these guys are going. I think as they've gone through their career across their 4 albums, each one has progressed them to being even bigger and better artists. And it's just another great band, another great example of where rock music can and has been going over the last several years. And even though it's not catching on in the mainstream, there's still some really great stuff going on. I guess I should add that if you don't know who Taylor Momsen is, she's the lead singer of The Pretty Reckless. She was also the actress that played Cindy Lou Who in the early 2000s in The Grinch with Jim Carrey. So it's got a little bit different. I think she brings a little bit of a different theatrical flair to their stage performances. She's also cool to follow on social media. She does a bunch of crazy stuff. But anyway, it's great to see a bigger personality in rock music, because I feel like that's where rock music has really kind of suffered over the last probably 10 or 15 years. We've lost a lot of those bigger personalities, and Taylor Momsen could definitely be one of those. And the last band I got on my list is also a pretty new band. Their first album came out in 2019. They've released 4 albums, which I think one of them was a live album. So it might only be like 3 studio albums plus that live album. But I love to see where they go in the future. Same with a lot of these other bands. What separates this band from those other bands that I talked about is the other band's a little more kind of like straightforward rock music. These guys are going down their own path, and it's kind of interesting to see where the subculture, the underground of rock music is going. I think these guys are going to be part of that path. But the band is called Youth Fountain. They're definitely more on the punk kind of side of rock music. They're not like hardcore punk. They're not like, The Chisel or something like that, one of those newer bands. But what Youth Fountain does is they've got this pop punk kind of vibe. They also mix in some emo. There's some alternative in there. There is some straightforward rock influence also. It's a band that, like I said, it's kind of moving rock in a different direction. Whereas you're seeing some bands like The Pretty Reckless, Greta Fleet getting some main play or some play in the mainstream. Youth Fountain is definitely underground. I think that's where the really cool, interesting stuff is going on in rock music. And this is one of those bands that moving forward, I can't wait to see what they do next. Well, that's all I got for today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Make sure you drop me a comment down below. Let me know what some of your favorite newer bands are. They're kind of doing different things with rock music. And, of course, I could have gone on even longer, especially when I talked about punk music. I mean, you got bands like The Chisel out there doing great stuff. You got bands like Get Dead that's doing great stuff. Polly Van Dam, who used to be in the Bomb Pops, should be releasing some new music this year. So punk music in particular has really been getting interesting over the last several years. But there's also some other really cool stuff going on in rock music that I think a lot of people are kind of missing out on. But let me know what you guys think. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. And that's all I got. Until next time, keep on spinning. Peace.